stand there. Until I decided, maybe if you don't stand there, the guns and like hide in the bushes.
Yeah, because they only have, the 2 shots.
There's like 5 minutes of load. So I watched a documentary about when they were like fighting like Native Americans and stuff. But by the time they load like one gun, it's like they shoot off like 10 arrows.
Now you've just witnessed one set of volleys. We'll reload and we'll end up firing twice more. But before I do that, while I give them a chance to reload, I'll tell you a bit about who we are and about these weapons that we have. We're the trained band of the city of Bristol. That is to say, we reside within Bristol, England. It is now the year 1574, and England has no standing army, as it were. We rely upon the militias, which are just about every man in the country, with whatever weapons and armor he can afford. But the militias are not trained. As members of the trained band, we train a couple of times a year. You might think of us as a National Guard, but we're not professional soldiers. But we are trained to use modern weapons. So a portion of our troops are equipped with firearms. Now, guns have been used in Europe since the early 1300s. That was over 2.5 centuries ago. And in that time, technology has improved, and it has gotten to the point where no army would take to the field without some of their men armed with firearms. Now, there are different styles that we have, but they have certain traits in common, as these are military weapons, not hunting weapons. First of all, these are smooth bore. That is to say, if you look down the barrel, and I don't recommend looking down the barrel of a gun, but if you did, it would look like the inside of a pipe. It's smooth metal. Because of that, the ball fits loosely and it goes out at an odd angle. With training, a man can hit, say, a 5x5 circle at 50 yards relatively often. That's pretty good accuracy for this time. But we don't need the accuracy. We have large numbers. Imagine dozens of men firing every few seconds at a target that's several hundred men. You don't need a lot of accuracy when you have a wall of lead. Now, these are also muzzle-loading weapons. That is to say, your powder, your lead ball, and anything else that needs to go inside the gun has to go in through the muzzle, the front, the business end, if you will. And that is true with all of these weapons. Now, in the 1500s, you do have rifled weapons. They're good for hunting, but they're expensive, so the common soldier can't afford them. We also have breech-loading weapons that open up and can be loaded from behind, as you might be accustomed to. They're also very expensive, and they have a tendency to spit sparks because we can't quite seal the barrel once it has that opening. So I don't really want a piece that spits sparks on me when I'm wearing about 1 pound of gunpowder. So we use muzzle loaders, we use smooth bores. They're cheaper and safer. Now there is some difference in the types of pieces we have, a bit of the evolution of the technology. The oldest style we have is where it all began, back in the 1300s. This is a hand cannon, a miniature cannon upon a stick. The first attempt to make a piece of black powder artillery small enough for one man to use. A metal tube filled with powder, originally loaded with gravel, bits of nail, bits of pottery, anything that could be loaded in and flung towards an enemy. An effective range of perhaps 25 feet, much less if your opponent is wearing good armor. But it was effective enough that with a few hours training, a man could be effective on the battlefield, whereas learning to use a sword, a powerful bow, a crossbow, that takes years of practice. Very simple weapon to use, and effective enough that the technology continued. It's loaded with a small amount of powder, and if it were a battle, I'd add a bit of solid matter on top. A little bit of powder goes right here, what we call the touch hole. It's just like a small cannon. And apply a burning match cord, a slow burning fuse. Heat meets gunpowder, and you get something like this. Give him fire! That's how it all starts. It has a short barrel, you'll notice. That means it's not very powerful, not very good against armor. And also there's no trigger. Just my hand holding a match cord. That's why I'm wearing gloves. No doubt many fingers were singed before they saw they needed to improve the technology. And that only took about 100 years. We go forward to the 1400s and we find the arquebus. It's an improved version of the black powder firearm. A longer barrel is more powerful. A piece this size could probably be effective against armor up to about 40 to 50 yards off if you hit your man. You'll also notice that he has a pivoting serpent, a little hook that holds that match cord far away from his delicate fingers.
Right.
Excellent. He does not have any powder inside the gun at the moment, but you'll notice once he sets the match cord in the serpent, far away from his hands, he can open his pan and focus on aiming the weapon, and with that ignition, the powder inside the barrel would fire. He can focus on his target, not on whether he's going to burn his hand off or not. So it made the weapon much more effective. Biggest problem was every arquebus was different. Some were larger, smaller, used a different size lead ball, a different amount of gunpowder. Very hard to equip an army when every man has a completely different weapon. As we get into the modern day, the 1500s, that brings us to the age of the caliber. The caliber is the same size as the arquebus, but it is standardized. Every caliber in the army should use the same amount of powder, fire the same size lead ball, much more efficient. It still relies upon the match cord, but now, in the modern day, we have an internal spring mechanism, a lock. Much easier and safer to handle than that loose pivoting device on the medieval version. But otherwise, it is about the same as the arquebus. About a 40 to 50 yard armor penetration. If you want a more powerful weapon, something that actually can penetrate armor up to 70, 80, perhaps 100 yards, you're going to need a musket. The musket appeared only about the mid-1500s, so it's very new to us. It's much bigger and heavier, so heavy that it is used with a Y-shaped rest to help support the weight of that heavy weapon. As I said, this might penetrate armor up to 80 yards away, depending on the quality of the armor and the quality of the powder. It fires a lead ball that weighs about 1 1/4 ounces. That's about 80 caliber or larger. Very imposing weapon, but very slow to catch on because it's more expensive than the caliber. In the 1500s, the caliber is the more common weapon, but the musket is becoming more popular. Maybe one day it will become the dominant weapon on the battlefield, but that has yet to be seen. Because, however, it takes, with any of these weapons, the better part of a minute to reload, in order to make certain the unit can continue fighting, we line up in a deep formation. 2 dozen men deep. We fire one row at a time. We're going to demonstrate this tactic so you can see that even with a slow to load weapon, we can maintain a fairly steady rate of fire. And if you imagine we had enough depth, the men would have time to reload before they get to the front again. Gentlemen, take up your piece on the right hip, low well upon your match and affix, then guard your piece at your hip. So as I said, if we had the depth, we could continue out this motion, each man reloading before he gets to the front, and continue until each man has used up his pound or so of powder and shot. Keep your muzzles high. You got a man in front of you. One of the more difficult tasks to teach these men is how to line up the match cord with the powder on the first attempt, so they do not need to adjust. That is one of the more difficult skills to teach. We'll see how well they learn this skill. Gentlemen, make ready to give fire by rank counter marches to maintain ground. Come on, hard. Open your hands. We've come to the loud part again. Give fire! Cover! Counter march! Cover! Hard! Open your hands. Give fire! Cover your match. Counter march. Hard. Open your hands. of the rest. Give fire! Give fire! Cover. Gentlemen, form up. One rank on this ground. Try and maintain open order betwixt foils. One rank. Now, as you notice, 2 shots fired at a time is not very impressive. As I said, we would line up dozens of men across, a dozen or more men deep, and we would have dozens of shots at one time. To try and get as close to that as possible, we're going to load and have all 7 guns fire at once. For your enjoyment, but mostly for our own. So take just a minute as we reload. I'll pull out the steps so that you can see how the manuals are written, because most men coming into the military in the 60s
I'll be right behind you.
never handled a firearm. So we lay out everything in detail, mostly for our own protection.
Part with the whole face.
On my command! Take up your piece upon your right hip, prime your piece, close your pack, blow and wipe off any excess powder, then guard your piece upon your shoulder. What they're doing is they're pouring a bit of finely ground touch powder into the pan, in a small dish outside of the gun's barrel. It is the powder in the pan, the touch powder, that burning match cord is going to fall into in a moment's time and fire off the piece. Gentlemen, order your piece upon the left-hand side. Handle your charges, charge your piece. Wad your barrel, draw and point, return your scouring stick, and guard your piece upon your shoulder. Incidentally, that's about 2 dozen steps out of the printed manuals, all in one breath. In our piece for a battle, after they pour a measured amount of powder down the barrel, they would add a lead ball. As this is a festival and not a battle, we're just using a small scrap of cloth. That is also because just beyond the trees, that's probably where many of your vehicles are currently residing. We don't want to do any undue damage to your property. You're welcome. Now they put a measured amount of powder down the barrel. Most of our men have a bandolier, a set of wooden bottles hanging from their shoulder. Each bottle holds enough powder for 1 shot. Others of us have a flask or a horn that has a measure built in. The key is to know how much powder goes inside the gun. If there's not enough powder in the gun, the lead ball will not have enough force to penetrate armor. But if you have too much powder inside the gun when you go to fire, right next to your face you have something that could very well explode. Not a good idea for anyone. So we like to know how much powder goes inside the gun. Now they also use a tool called a scouring stick to get that powder all the way into the back of the gun, the breech. They have to remove the scouring stick when they're finished, otherwise this will become a projectile. And just 2 years ago, in the year 1572, the train bands in London were preparing for a military demonstration in front of the Queen. One of the men forgot to take the scouring stick out of his gun, fired in a mock battle, that wooden rod flew across the field, struck and killed the man. And they had to have a military funeral where they were trying to test it. I see all the scouring sticks are back where they belong, so we should be in good shape. Take up your piece upon your right hip and blow upon your match in a fix. Then guard your piece at your hip. They're now doing that last step. They're taking that match cord, they're lining it up with the gunpowder, and if all goes well, we should have a pretty loud report in a moment's time. Again comes the loud part. 1, 2,